The melting point range of a sample can be very useful. The melting point of a sample is reported as a temperature range from which you first start to see evidence of melting, which is called sweating, to the sample being fully liquefied or melted. If we have an unknown compound, we can determine its melting point range and look at a list of literature values for known compounds for the purposes of identification. The melting point range can tell us something about the purity of the sample. The more pure the sample, the fewer degrees over which that sample will melt. In other words, it'll have a very narrow melting point range, like 99 to 100 degrees Celsius. However, if a sample is contaminated with other compounds and is a mixture, the melting point range will be broadened. In fact, it will melt over a wider range of temperatures, and possibly it will be lower than expected. So the more narrow that range, the more pure the compound. Let's go over how to measure the melting point of a solid. In the back of the organic lab, there are several melting point apparatuses, meltemps, and to the left of each one, there should be a page of instructions that are fairly easy to follow. So what we'll do is we'll go over how to load a sample for the instrument and basically how to use it. And then when it's your turn to do it in lab, you'll need to rely on the instructions that will be to the left. So often the apparatus is unplugged, and the first thing you can do is plug it in. The beep is normal. Next, if you know what compound you have been working with and want to determine the melting point of, you can look up the known melting point and then program the oven to preheat to 25 degrees below that point. Or if you know it's one of three, you look for the lowest melting point of those three compounds, subtract 25 and program that in. Again, the instructions to the left of the apparatus are helpful for doing so. Once you've programmed that temperature and the apparatus is preheating, then you can prepare the sample in the tube. Take some of the sample, put it on a watch glass. Take a capillary melting point tube. Double check that one end is closed and the other end is open. Okay. And then simply tap the open end on top of that sample. Get a little bit in the tip of the open part. Then turn it over and gently tap, trying to get the sample into the bottom. And in this case, I have just that little bit in the bottom. That's probably enough. If your sample was stuck at the top, what you can do is grab a larger tube, drop the melting point capillary tube inside, and gently tap. That should bring the solid down, and that consolidated mine in the bottom. Tip it over, take it out, and now your tube is loaded. Now that the oven has preheated and I've heard it beep, and there are 4 stars on the display, I'm ready to take my sample and put it into the oven, and then I can view it through this little viewfinder. Alright, so if I lift that back up, you can see the sample go up, and then there it is. There's 3 spots, and I put it in the middle. Once we start the run, then we're going to be watching for melting. So let's do that. Right. Now the temperature will increase, and anytime that I want to make a note of a temperature, I simply press that button again. It's the return button or the arrow button. So I want to record the temperature where it first starts to look wet or glistening, or sweating is a word that we'd use for melting point analysis. So I would record that temperature by pressing the button, and then once the sample has fully melted or liquefied, I would want to press the button again. It can record up to 4 temperatures, so if you're not sure, you can hit the temperature, it'll be recorded. Alright, so I won't make you wait and watch this. So let's say that my sample was starting to melt. I could press the button, and once it's fully melted, press the button again. Okay. Then the easiest thing to do is simply press function to stop the run. If you're going to run another sample, you can follow the instructions here. You have to turn the oven off or no. If I want to look at those temperatures, all right, then I can follow the prompts on the instructions. So melt recall, going through the instructions using the function key to get here. There's the first one that I recorded. There's the second one. So I don't have to be paying attention to that number. I can be looking at the sample through the viewfinder. The last step is to remove the sample and discard it in the glass disposal boxes in the room. All right, now if you're doing more than one sample, you can run them at the same time. It just gets a little bit more, there's more going on. And so when you record temperatures, you have to know what that corresponds to. However, once you're used to this instrument, it is an efficient way to run an analysis. So we do recommend the first time you measure melting point, just do one sample. And that's it.